Hi, in this video, we're going to take a look at the table element in HTML. I know the table element can be really confusing to learn, and I'll do my best to explain it the best I can. So hopefully it's not hard at all for you to learn. I started out here with my basic Hello World webpage. I think that'll be a good start. And the table element, I'm going to give us some space here. We don't need to have everything all right on top of each other. So the table element looks just like this, table, and I'll explain what the table element is, and I'll also give you some practical use examples later on in this video, just so you know when to use them. The good news is we don't really need tables as often as we used to. We used to use tables to control layout and all kinds of different things within the HTML, and that's all completely not necessary now with CSS. So we're going to use CSS to control our layout, not relying on tables, because tables can get really confusing really fast if you try to use them for that. So, but the good thing that tables I should say the thing that tables are really good for is tabular data. And usually you're going to get tabular data. When I say tabular data, I just mean like think of an Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so an Excel spreadsheet has tabular data. It has columns and rows, and the data corresponds with each other depending on what row it's in. I'm sorry, what column it's in, or and so on. So that's all that I mean by tabular data. And when you go to use tables, you're generally going to be using them with a database. Okay, so if you have a database where your visitors can search something on your site, and the database results will be shown in a table if you want them to. Okay, so the way a table works, it's a little bit different than Microsoft Excel. Okay, where you think of columns and rows, it results in the same thing. I know that didn't make sense, so I'm just going to go ahead and start adding another element within the table, and it's the table row element. That's all that is. Okay, so now we have a table row. Let me go back up. So now we have a table row element, which is right here, and that's within the table, within the whole table element. Okay, and again, it's within it because it's between the opening tag and closing tag. And to make it even more confusing, we're going to add one more element inside the row element. Okay, so we're going to add a TD tag. And all the TD tag is, think of it as the cell. Okay, this is the row, and this is the cell inside the row. And inside the cell, we'll put, this is my cell, and I'm going to add an attribute to the table just for the purposes of this video. You'll never have to worry about this because you can do this with CSS, and you won't have to mess with that. But I just wanted to add a border on it just so we can see the table. So there's our table. Okay, right now it's only one cell, one row. If we wanted to add another cell, we can add another cell. We just go TD. This is another cell, and I'm going to save this just to show you what happened, and then I'll explain kind of what's going on. So I reloaded. Now this other cell is right next to it. Now all of a sudden our table has one row and it has two columns. And this is where it gets a little bit confusing for some people, because in HTML we can't really say how many columns it has. We can only say how many rows it has. The way that we determine the columns is by how many cells are within the row. Okay, so this row has two cells, therefore it's two columns. Okay, so even though there's an element for row, there's not really an element for column. The only way we know it's two columns is because it has two cells. So, and if that doesn't make sense to you, that's completely okay. I don't expect it to completely make sense because it is a little bit confusing. So let's say I wanted a table with two rows and two columns, so kind of a 2 by 2 table. What I'd have to do is add another row, because that's our second row, and add two more cells. Okay, so now we have, and I think I'll have to put something in here, test 2, and I'll save that and reload. And now we have a table with two columns and two rows. And the reason it has two columns, again, is because we have two cells within each row. Okay, and you want the number of cells, the number of the TD tags within each row to match. Okay, so it wouldn't really make sense for me to have 3 cells here, because I'll just show you what happens. But it wouldn't really make sense for me to have 3 cells in one and 2 in the other in this example, because then it wouldn't really be a table, right? It would be something weird where we're missing this piece up in the upper right hand, and that's kind of what happens when you don't match them up. Okay, so you want the numbers to match the number of cells. Okay, so we have, I gotta stop saying okay so much. I've noticed that, and I'll do my best to work on that, so sorry about that. I know it's confusing, okay? I know it is a little bit confusing, but just I think the best way to look at it is just accept that we can't accept the fact that we can't determine the columns. We can only determine the rows, and we can, in the number of cells within each row, determine the column. That's why we have to keep the number of cells consistent from row to row if you want a nice little table. And so again, if I wanted this 3 columns, I would just add another cell. This is 3, and I'd have to match it to the other row down here. So TD, this is 3, T, okay, or something. So I'll save that, and there you go. So now we have a table with 2 rows and 3 columns. The reason, in my experience, in my opinion anyways, the reason that things are kind of set up this way where you can't determine the columns so much is because most of the time when you use tables, you'll be using data from a database, and you'll be programming stuff to make kind of dynamic things. So for example, if somebody searched for something on your website, they might have a table with 1 result, or they might have a table with 100 results. Okay, so you might not know the number of rows and columns you have. Well, I guess you would know the columns, but you wouldn't necessarily know the rows. And so if I take this highlighted area here, which just represents 1 row in a table with 3 cells inside that row, I can make code around this to say I don't expect you to understand the code just from learning HTML, but I can make code with PHP or whatever that says for each result in my database, repeat this highlighted area. Okay, repeat the row. Okay, because we're repeating the row for each for each matching criteria in our database. And I know that was a lot of information, but I'm just trying to give you kind of a real world example of kind of when you use tables and why you'd want to use a table. The good news about tables is we don't need them anymore so much for layout. I think I kind of said before, we used to use tables for layout a lot, and then you would have to do some really funky stuff with spanning across columns, and it was just a real mess. Okay, but you don't have to worry about that anymore. All you have to worry about is really just matching the cells, matching the cell numbers. Okay, so there's 3 cells and there's 3 cells, okay, in each row. And there's one more thing just to make things a little bit more confusing for you that I'll get into in this video. I'm going to copy this whole row here, and I'm going to make it a 3rd row, but I'm going to make it on the top. Okay, so if I save this and reload, it should be, now we have 3 rows, and each row has 3 cells. And there's another element called the TH tag. So I'm going to go, actually, I'm going to kind of cheat here. Sorry about that. So I'll replace TD with TH in selection. That do it? No, replace all. I think I blew it. Sorry about that. I know this is really fun to watch me fumble around with this, but sorry about that. I'll try to avoid doing that in the future. So in selection, replace all. There we go. So now it changed everything to a TH instead of the TD. Just for that first row, though, all of our other rows are still TD. So what the TH element is just the table header, okay? And it's very, very similar to the TD in the way it acts. We still need to make sure it has 3 cells, okay? Because we have 3 cells down here. We have 3 cells down here within each row. And I'm going to save that just to show you what happened. So you can see the table header, it kind of made the first row bold. And I hope you can kind of see the value of that, because it can, you're obviously going to need some kind of title for each column of information. And the other good thing with this is now we can reference this in CSS, right? We can reference, only change the table header to this color background with this color text to make it different from the colors down here, okay, to give it whatever style you want. And the other cool thing we can do with CSS with tables, which I'll show you in another video, is we can make every other row kind of a different color just to make it easier to view the data. Your tables are never going to look like this, like my example. This is really just to show you how it works, but you can make tables really nice looking with using CSS. So don't worry if this looks, you know, you might say, well, this looks really blocky and old and dated. I don't want a table, but that's really not, don't take that away from this, because this example is just an example. So you can definitely change everything you want to in a table, just like with everything else on your web page with CSS later on. So I hope that was a little bit of, I hope that wasn't too confusing, because I know when I first learned tables, it was really, it was confusing. But I mean, once you get the hang of it, the good news is you only have to learn it once, and then you'll never have to learn it again. So that's kind of the way I look at it. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks a lot for watching. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel and check out my website, zelenko.com. Thanks a lot.